Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. This is, we've done some Zoom webinars type thing for our board meetings, but this is the first time we're doing this for service changes. So please bear with us. Hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties. I'm going to walk through how to use the Zoom feature if you're on Zoom, and hopefully we'll go along together. So my name is Hillary. I'm the Planning and Marketing Manager here at MTD, and we'll go ahead and get started. So first, I'm going to give a message in Spanish for anyone who might be listening in Spanish. Información en español. Si necesita la información de hoy en español, por favor, mande un mensaje en la caja que dice Q&A o QIA con su correo electrónico y MTD va a enviar la presentación en español a usted después. Vamos a publicar videos en español y inglés en los días siguientes que expliquen los cambios de servicio también. Si tiene preguntas durante esta presentación, puede enviar un mensaje en español y le responderemos en español. Gracias. So how to ask questions. Many of you are used to this at this point, but some people this might be their first time. So all attendees are in listen-only mode and won't be able to share their video or screens at any point. But questions will be answered at the end of the presentation, but you can ask questions throughout the meeting. I may answer them before you, later in the presentation, but you can feel free to do that by using the Q&A feature, which, depending if you're on a phone or a tablet or a PC, there's a little box that says Q&A, and that's how you can type it in, and I'll get those questions. So tonight's updates. This is what we're going to go over tonight. There's a lot to report on, more than service changes. So I want to sort of take you through how we've responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll, of course, talk about the service changes that go into effect on Monday, August 17th. We'll give an update on our transit center project, which is getting very close to completion. And then we'll do some questions and answers at the end. So when we look at the pandemic, it's affected all of our lives, and it's certainly affected MTD to a large extent. So I'm going to sort of take you through this flow chart of what has happened thus far since really early March. In early March, when the first positive COVID-19 cases happened in California, and then we got our first positive case here in Santa Barbara County, we began immediately to add additional cleaning and disinfecting to our bus fleet every night. It's happened every night since early March, and every bus that went out that day gets a full disinfection with on all the high-touch surfaces with a hospital-grade disinfectant. And we take this very seriously for our passengers and, of course, for our employees. And so we do that. We've done that since March. We'll continue to do it into the foreseeable future to keep everyone as safe as possible. So after that happened, it really kicked off, especially here locally. And school campuses, again, in mid-March, it was sort of a cascading effect. They began to close. UCSB was first. City College and Santa Barbara Unified followed quickly thereafter. And at that point, we suspended some of our services that are really mostly carry large groups of students. And we're very proud of that. But we knew that at that point, it didn't make a lot of sense to keep running those lines since they would likely be empty since the campuses were closed. So at that point, on March 19th, we suspended service on lines 15X, 16, 28, and the boosters that serve the junior highs and high schools. And on that same day, we started rear door boarding. We stopped collecting fares, and we restricted capacity on our buses. We started with a reduction down to 8 passengers on a 40-foot bus. That's our standard bus that you see the most of, that we have the most of, and 5 people on a 30-foot bus. I'll talk a little later about how we've expanded that slightly, but it's still rather restricted. So we stopped that service on the 19th. Immediately, even before that, we were looking at what needs to happen if we need to reduce further. And actually on that day, we didn't know it was going to happen, but on that day, March 19th, the governor put in place the stay-at-home order statewide. And so that's when we really saw our ridership drop dramatically. And so we took a further step with our planning department and our operations department to move on April 6th to suspend lines 10, 30, and 34. That's the downtown waterfront shuttle, 36 and 37. And quickly after that, the first last mile shuttles that go to Amtrak twice a day. So that's line 90, 91, and 92. We did that because the train trips that they meet were not running and still are not. And also around that time, our board declared a fiscal and public health emergency. This allows us and our general manager to be more nimble in reacting to this. Every day is different, and that gave us the flexibility to do what we needed to do with regards to service and workforce and keeping everyone safe. Soon after that, basically public health wisdom was telling folks that face coverings really should be required. And so we did, and we do, and we will for quite a while require cloth face coverings or masks of anyone who boards our bus, and of course our bus operators as well. After that, we took a look at what capacity really looked like on our buses. We were turning people behind, even though our ridership was down dramatically. We were leaving some people behind, tried to send some boosters along, but we also looked at the space inside the buses and figured out that we think safely 15 people could fit on a 40-foot bus and still maintain physical distancing. So that's what the limit is on a 40-foot bus today. So normally, and we were ready, I think we were a day away from announcing when our service change public meetings were going to happen. We booked all the rooms and everything, but we had to put that process on hold. Normally every April we go out to the public, we talk about what we are proposing for our August service changes, we get feedback, we make more tweaks, and then we go about the process in the summer of preparing all of our passenger information. And then mid-August, the changes occur. We just weren't able to. Obviously, we couldn't have in-person meetings, and we didn't know what the next week looked like, much less August. So this says here, planning staff iterate endlessly. They have, and I really want to thank from the bottom of my heart our planning team, Tony and Jennifer and Mark, to thank them for all the work that they've done. We're used to doing these planning cycles on a 3 to 4 month basis. The things that they've been able to churn out for our drivers is staggering how quickly they've been able to do it and do it well and correctly. So eventually we had to start making decisions about what we were going to do for August. And we've decided, because of the state of, and I'll explain a little bit later why we made these decisions, but we decided that certain services will remain suspended for August, starting August 17th, well, continuing past August 17th, I suppose. So that would be lines 10, 16, 30, 34, 36, 37, and Amtrak until those train trips come back. And then we also decided, as we were hearing, that Santa Barbara City College and UCSB will be returning, but with a much reduced student population taking on-campus classes, that those 2 lines would return, but with less frequent service. And we were also planning to have our junior high and high school serving boosters back, but last week the governor said that any county on the watch list school can't go back into session for K through 12, so those are on hold, but we're ready if and when they decide to come back in. We also launched a community survey on June 29th. Thank you very much. It's closed now, but thank you very much for everyone who took it. We had 935 responses in less than a month, which is great. Definitely the quickest response we've had. And we really just wanted to get input on, are people taking the bus? If they are, why? If they aren't, why not? And how are they feeling about safety and about COVID and transit? And then of course, August 17th, Monday, the 17th, our service changes will go into effect. So I want to get to what those are here in just a sec. So, but what's driving these decisions, right? No one ever wants to reduce service. No one wants their line to go away. We don't like doing that either, but we have to be very honest with what our constraints are. And the biggest one is workforce constraints. Before the pandemic, we frankly had a driver shortage. Unemployment was at 2% here in Santa Barbara. It was very hard to hire for anything, but also for something like bus driver. It's just, you need a particular kind of person, and we were having trouble. We also had a lot of retirements lately, so we definitely have constraints. We had constraints before, we have them now. Obviously, as you would imagine, with a lot of workforces, we've had drivers who've gone out on leave because of, they're in a higher risk category, or they had childcare issues or what have you. And so those constraints, if we don't have enough drivers to do the work, then we can't put out an endless amount of service. School closures and schedules, a third of our ridership are students, and that really drives a lot of our planning and a lot of our service. And so if those schools are closed, obviously we're going to adapt and adjust. And public health and fiscal stability. These aren't really in any order, but that is obviously very important. Looking at what we can do, and we want to be a bit conservative in what we're putting out there so that when we make these decisions, we know that to the best of our ability, we will be able to make this service. Thankfully, we've received some federal CARES Act funding to help us through this time. As I said, we haven't collected fares since mid-March. Our fares bring in about $8 million in operating funds a year, which is quite a lot, and it's very necessary. Thankfully, the CARES Act funding, we believe, will hold us over through this next year to deal with the extra expenses and all that. And while we wait for the sales tax to hopefully bounce back. But we're hoping to make that money last as long as possible to keep our service stable as long as possible. So you may be interested in what's ridership like right now. Some of you may not be riding buses right now if you're not taking the bus to work or other central trips. Before the pandemic, on a standard weekday, we had 24,000 to 27,000 average daily riders on a weekday. It's quite a lot. That at first plummeted. Actually, I think our ridership was down 85%. You can see here, these bars show April, May, June, and then just the 2 weeks prior to where we are now. And it has been ticking up. When the economy sort of closed back down a little bit in the past 2 weeks, we saw a little bit of a reduction, but whereas we were seeing 24,000 people or 27,000 people a weekday, now we're seeing in the 6,000s. And generally our summer numbers are lower because a lot of the college students are gone. So it's almost, if tomorrow it were a day in the fall where normally we have a lot of ridership, that percentage would be, much higher or much more negative. So, August service changes. These changes, as I mentioned, go into effect on Monday, August 17th, 2020. Excuse me. And this is what they are. They are minor changes. I'm going to go through this list and then I'm going to go into each one in depth. Minor changes to lines 12X, 20, 24X, and 27 for on-time performance improvement. we have removed one late inbound weekday trip on the line 7. Line 15X, as I mentioned before, will return with reduced service when Santa Barbara City College in-person classes begin. Line 28 will return with reduced service when UCSB in-person classes begin. And lines 10, 16, 36, and 37 will remain suspended for now. And the downtown and waterfront shuttle, unfortunately, are suspended through summer 2021. I'll mention a little bit about that now. That is a partnership between MTD and the city of Santa Barbara. The city of Santa Barbara helps fund that with downtown parking revenues. As you might imagine, they took a big hit to their budget from the pandemic as well. Both people not parking and also not collecting parking fees for quite a while. And so we've agreed to pause that service through summer of 2021. So lines 12X and 24X, this is of course our popular express lines from downtown Santa Barbara to Goleta and UCSB. So if you remember from last year, we did some work trying to make these two lines more express. And so what we did last year is we dropped some of the stops that were on those lines because they did have quite a few stops. We dropped some of those to try and make that trip shorter, make it more express. That, to a large extent, particularly on the 12X, actually seemed to work in parts of that. And so we're able to tighten that schedule up a little. We're still seeing some on-time performance issues on the 24X. So what we're doing is this. These two lines are interlined, meaning one becomes the other. So if you're on a 12X and you ride it to the end of the line, generally it's going to become a 24X coming back in the other direction. So we're making minor schedule changes to the 12X outbound. These changes are just weekday, just Monday through Friday, and minor schedule changes to line 24X inbound. So some of these 12X trips heading outbound, heading out to Goleta, will be faster when we make these changes, which is great, and less time. Some of you, if you read the 12X, you know, oftentimes if you're going outbound, you sit for a while at the time point at Hollister and Kellogg. That won't be the case generally, and we're hoping those trips will be a little quicker. The 24X inbound trips, again, we're trying to make those more on time and adhere to the schedule better. Weekend schedules aren't changing, and not every time is changing. And in fact, the transit center departure times on both lines are not changing. Line 20, Carpinteria. We are making, the past few years, we've made quite a few changes to reckon with on-time performance on the line 20 on weekdays. It's pretty dialed in. We're really proud of how those numbers are looking, even pre-pandemic. But Saturday and Sunday, we still had quite a bit of lateness and struggle to make those scheduled times. So we've made some changes on Saturdays and Sundays on line 20, and that's outbound and inbound trips to improve that on-time performance. Line 27 in Isla Vista, same thing actually. We've adjusted some of the weekday past few years. This year, we are making some minor changes to Saturday and Sunday for on-time performance. It was just taking a lot longer than it used to for that bus to get through Isla Vista, both with loads, and if you've ever driven through Isla Vista, you know that you have to go very slow in order to be safe on those streets, and that's for outbound and inbound trips on the weekends. Line 7. So this is a very tiny change, and these images below show on the left-hand side with the yellow part highlighted, that's the current schedule Monday through Friday. And this is just inbound line 7 on a weekday. This is in the evening. So currently there is a late trip that's 2 hours after the earlier trip, and it's a partial. So it stops, picks up at Kyle and Turnpike, and then heads to the transit center with a few interim stops in between. But the ridership on that was extremely low, and the way that everything is sort of structured with schedules internally just really didn't make sense to keep it around. So on the left, you see that. On the right, you see this is the new schedule, and the last one will arrive at the transit center at 8:15. Now, if you find yourself taking line 7 outbound on weeknights, you know that it runs much later. We're not touching any of that. So you'll still be able to get back out to Goleta in the late 9 o'clock hour. Line 15X, this is of course between UCSB, Isla Vista, and Santa Barbara City College. It's currently suspended because the campus is closed, but it will resume when in-person classes begin in Santa Barbara City College. As of right now, it's our understanding that they will, but in a much reduced capacity than normal. And when that service resumes, it will be less frequent than it used to be. So the line 15X only runs Monday through Friday. It will continue to only run Monday through Friday. Previously, it had sort of 3 versions. It had a Monday through Thursday when school's in session. It had a Friday when school's in session, which had less service. And then it had an alternate schedule, which it would run when UCSB was in, but City College was out. So we're just streamlining that for right now. There's only one schedule for the 15. It runs Monday through Friday, and it runs when City College is in session. The headways are 62 minutes, so around an hour. The span of service is also shorter, between 7:15 a.m. and 6:55 p.m. We do expect that that should work for the number of people who are attending in-person classes, from what we understand from the college, but we'll be watching very closely. Line 28, similar situation, currently suspended. That will resume when in-person classes start at UCSB when the quarter begins. Again, they have a much reduced plan for students to return to in-person classes. We're in constant contact with both UCSB and City College. And so that service, which UCSB helps fund, it's going to be less frequent. Before the pandemic, it was every 10-minute service, but there were also thousands and thousands of people in Isla Vista and in the historic El Colegio area who took that line. A lot of them are not there right now, and a reduced number will be there in the fall. And so the line 28 in its normal state runs 7 days a week. When UCSB comes back, it will only run on weekdays, and the headways will be about every 36 minutes. The span of service did not change, 7:30 to 11:40. And as a reminder, in that same corridor, there's still full service on the 11. It'll be on the 27 and the 24. So there's still a fair amount of service in Isla Vista. It'll just be a little less on the 28. I mentioned these before, the suspended lines. Line 10 serves the Cathedral Oaks corridor. In its pre-pandemic state, it only had about 8 trips a day, very reduced. This is our sort of worst performer ridership-wise. And it sort of functions as a booster when schools are in session, when K-12 schools are in session. So we're going to be suspending that for now. And if boosters come back, when school comes back, when junior highs and high schools come back, we are looking at the different corridors that the 10 sort of boosts for the boosters to make sure that we are throwing some service out there to get folks to school the best we can with our capacity limits. Line 16, Santa Barbara City College shuttle. This goes between downtown and the campus. There are other lines that can get you from downtown to the campus, the 4, 17, and 5. And we think that that should be sufficient in the meantime. But again, we'll be taking a look at that when classes resume. The Seaside shuttle in Carpinteria is on hold, and the Crosstown is as well. Seaside, there's still the line 20, of course, full service right now. Line 37, we still have the line 1 and 2 that go between the east and west side and downtown. So downtown and waterfront shuttles, I mentioned, that's line 30 and 34. And we've got that still on pause. So those booster services, I mentioned that They're not going to be coming back on August 18th as planned, but we have done some work to tweak them a little. So if you're interested in booster services, this information is for you. When they return, whenever that is, we are adding a stop as we did last year. Last year we added a stop on the 2630 that serves Goleta Valley Junior High. We added a stop at Los Carneros and Carl Storrs Drive, which was is near all the new housing on Los Carneros, also near Goleta City Hall. And there are junior high and high school students that live there. So we added a stop on the 2630 AM and PM. We changed directions on the PM trip back in, I want to say March, beginning of March. And we got some feedback that it now is on a different side of the street and students were having to cross over. So we're going to keep that new stop, but reverse the direction back to how it used to be. And then we also added or activated that same stop on a few other lines, line 2660, which is just, it's a 7th period Goleta Valley booster. And that will now stop at Los Carneros and Carl Storrs, and one of the Dos Pueblos High School boosters, 2740, morning and afternoon, will also stop at that stop. So serving some more students, getting them to and from school when those services resume. The new schedule guide is, as you might imagine, we were later in the year getting this done, but the new schedule guide is currently out to print. It's actually being printed this weekend, and will be available in print starting the first week of August. So we will get the word out on how to get those safely. And a PDF version of the schedule guide will be available on our website early next week, so you can look at those schedules. So quickly, want to give you a transit center update. Very exciting. If you, I know way fewer people are downtown milling around right now, but if you haven't been by the transit center, I'll share some photos of our process. If you'll recall, we started late last summer, on fully renovating the transit center and the driveway. So these are some works in progress. The one in the bottom middle is a picture actually from the women's public restroom. That was a lot of old pipes in the ground and needed a sort of full excavation. So that's been done. On the right, you see the driveway being reinforced. It's now the strength of some airport runways. So that's exciting from a wear and tear perspective. We're very excited about that. These are some sort of stage pictures of the ceiling and the work being done, going from left to right and top to bottom. All the new duct work, and then new ceiling tiles and the new lighting and acoustical panels. Can tell you, having been in there, it is so much brighter in the transit center. The light is all LED, and it is a very different change from the really dark center that we had before. What we call our control room, where our customer service representatives work. It's very different. Actually don't have an original picture of it, but it had sort of a false roof on it. Now it is out a little bit further, glass all around, and you can, if you look closely, you can see that those service windows, they're at a good level for ADA purposes. And though we didn't know a pandemic was coming, it's very helpful that there's not open windows, but they're closed and you're able to speak through a hole that is also covered in the window to do your transactions, and there's a slot at the bottom for passes. A few more pictures. The exterior, the copper roof is on, picture of the bathroom, the benches and trash cans are going in, and then there is in partnership with the city of Santa Barbara, we put in a concrete pad in the street right in front, which is great, and again will help with wear and tear on Chapala Street. So if you have questions, please type them in. I'm going to actually keep showing you this. Whoops. And of course, have to go back through. How to do this, please type your questions into the Q&A box. If for some reason you're unable to do that and you would like to actually verbalize your question, you can raise your hand. This has a few images showing what that looks like, whether you're on your phone or a tablet or on the web. You look for the raise hand function. You can do that. If you're calling in by a phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. And when you do, when called on, I will give you talking privileges, and then you'll see a notification like this to unmute yourself. You'll click unmute and begin your question when I say your name. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any questions. Okay. So I did have a question about what safety measures we're taking. I just want to speak a little bit more to this. For our employees, there are a lot of measures going on in addition to obviously passengers and employees needing to wear face coverings. We also have lots of hand sanitizer in all different places in our terminal, in all the places that our bus operators work, and they have personal hand sanitizer as well that we've given out, and just really talking to our workforce about the importance of all the things that we know, right? Don't touch your face, wash your hands, use hand sanitizer if you can't, and just general hygiene practices. And we appreciate from our riders that you are taking those precautions as well and wearing the face covering, which is so important. I want to remind people that when you're on the bus and when you're waiting for the bus as well, and this isn't just our rule, but it's also the health officer order in our county and actually statewide, the mask needs to be all the way on, covering the nose and mouth at all times, not dipping below or a chin strap or on your head. I know you've all seen all kinds of things out there, but we just want to make sure that the mask is working as it should. So another question is, you mentioned waiting for sales tax to come back. How does that affect levels of service? So how does that affect levels of service? That affects levels of service because we get a fair amount of our revenue from sales tax and use that to operate the system. And as people have lost jobs and businesses are not just taking in as much revenue, people aren't paying as much sales tax. And so eventually that will affect our receipts. There's a bit of a lag because that takes a few months to show up. But it is starting to show up. We are, of course, hoping that our economy bounces back quickly, but we know that we have to be sort of conservative in the long run and try to keep it as stable as possible. So that could mean for levels of service, if our CARES Act money didn't carry as far as we'd hoped, or we have some kind of issue that affects our workforce further, then we may have to reduce levels of service further. Obviously, we hope it doesn't come to that, but we have to be realistic about that. Another question is, how can passengers help? So that's a great question. You can, of course, help by staying home if you don't need to go out for either essential work or groceries, medical appointments, things like that. Staying home is the best thing that we can all be doing at this time. I know it's hard, you get some cabin fever and you're stuck at home, but the faster we can, as a community, reduce the community spread of the virus, we can start to get back to some sense of normal. And we all want that in transit, but of course we all want it as people in our daily lives, whether it's getting back to work or getting back to restaurants or getting haircuts or whatever you need to do. It's really important. So the way that you can help is stay home if you can. If you do go out, wear a mask and follow all those hygiene processes and procedures that we all keep hearing about, and making sure that you're staying safe and not doing any risky activities. So if there are any other questions, please ask. Just want to share with you that we are really doing what we can here at MTD to listen to our customers. You can always reach out to us, the same phone numbers as always, or you can give us an email, info@sbmtd.gov. If you have any questions, always let us know. Our phone number is 805-963-3366, and we can answer any questions you have, be it about the changes or about what's going on with COVID. Happy to do that. I got one more question about how the State Street closure has affected MTD. So I mentioned a little bit about the downtown and waterfront shuttle, and obviously, if you've been on State Street, if you've seen State Street, you know that it's closed to vehicular traffic right now, down in the downtown portion. So obviously, we couldn't run a shuttle if we wanted to. And also, you know, the waterfront we've paused as well. We are sad about, you know, having to pause the shuttle. However, there's obviously very exciting things happening in downtown. And we want you to know that we will continue to be a part of the conversation downtown, what it looks like for mobility downtown and accessibility and all the options that we know make a good downtown. So we are not done, and we want to be a part of that and see what that looks like in the future, depending on what State Street looks like. So there's never been a good downtown that didn't have transit, but that can look a lot of different ways, and we want to be a part of that. So happy to take any other questions, but otherwise we can call it a night. This will be recorded, this was recorded and streaming live on our YouTube. It's available for replay there, and we'll be sharing it out on our social media as well. So we appreciate you for being participants and for asking great questions and for tuning in at home, and wish you all health and wellness. And we miss seeing you, but hope to see you again soon when it's safe to go back to our normal lives. So with that, from MTD, thanks so much for joining us.